Okay, so you want to own a skyscraper. You picture your name on the top floor, glass reaching into the clouds, a lobby with marble and security guards, and rent checks arriving every month from hundreds of tenants who have nowhere else to go once they have committed to your address. It feels like the ultimate trophy asset, permanent, undeniable, the kind of thing a city cannot take away from you once it is standing. And on the surface, the math looks almost boring in how safe it seems. You build floors, you rent floors, you collect income for decades, and the building just sits there generating cash while everyone below looks up and assumes you have already won. The problem is that a skyscraper is not really a building. It is a decades-long leveraged bet dressed up as real estate. And most people who dream about owning one are thinking about the concrete and the glass, when the thing that actually decides whether they get rich or get wiped out is sitting somewhere far less glamorous. It is sitting in a loan document. Because here is what a skyscraper actually is underneath the marble. It is an enormous pile of debt wearing a very tall, very expensive disguise. Almost nobody pays cash to build one. Developers borrow the vast majority of construction costs, sometimes 80 or 90% of the total, and then spend the next 20, 30, sometimes 50 years trying to earn enough rent to service that debt before the building even starts producing real profit for the owner. That single fact changes everything about how the business behaves. A skyscraper does not really compete with other buildings for tenants. It competes with interest rates for survival. And most people who imagine owning one have never actually asked the only question that matters. What happens to this tower if borrowing money gets more expensive halfway through paying it off? So let us start with the first question. What are you actually buying when you buy a skyscraper? Most people think they are buying square footage, height, prestige, a physical asset that simply exists and generates money because it is impressive. That is not really what a skyscraper is. A skyscraper is a bet that a very specific number, the rent you can charge per square foot, will stay high enough for long enough to outrun the cost of the debt, the cost of maintenance, and the slow decay of the building's relevance in a market that keeps building newer towers next door. In a normal rental property, you are renting shelter. In a skyscraper, you are renting status, location, and infrastructure all bundled into one vertical stack, and charging a premium for every floor that lets a company say it belongs in the skyline instead of somewhere ordinary. That distinction explains why skyscraper economics can look so extraordinary from a distance. A single floor in a trophy tower in Manhattan, London, or Hong Kong can rent for figures that would be unthinkable almost anywhere else in the same city. Multiply that by dozens or even over 100 floors, and the projected income on paper looks less like a building and more like a small country's tax revenue. To someone who has never seen the financing behind it, it looks like the closest thing real estate has to a money machine you can see from space. Build tall, rent expensive, collect forever. The problem is what happens before a single tenant moves in, because a skyscraper is one of the most front-loaded, capital-intensive projects in the world of business. The first cost is land, and in the kind of dense urban core where a skyscraper actually makes financial sense, land is already scarce and already expensive before you have poured a single foundation. Then comes the structure itself. Building upward is nothing like building outward. Every additional floor adds cost that grows faster than the floor below it, because the building needs a deeper foundation, a stronger steel frame, more elevator shafts, more redundant systems, and enough structural reinforcement to survive wind loads, seismic activity, and the sheer physics of holding thousands of tons of material hundreds of feet in the air. Elevators alone can consume a shocking share of a skyscraper's usable floor space and budget, because a building people cannot move through vertically is just a very tall storage unit. On top of that sits the mechanical systems, the fire suppression, the security infrastructure, the facade engineering, and the kind of finishes that make a lobby feel expensive enough to justify the rent upstairs. Major towers routinely cost well over $1 billion to complete, and some of the world's tallest buildings have run several $billion past their original budget before the first tenant ever signed a lease. Then there is time, and time is the hidden killer in this business. A skyscraper can take 5, 7, sometimes 10 years from the first shovel in the ground to a fully leased building. During all of that time, interest is accruing on the construction debt whether or not a single tenant has moved in. The building is spending money every single day it exists and earning nothing until it opens. And even after it opens, it can take years to fill every floor with paying tenants. That gap between when the spending starts and when the income catches up is where enormous financial pressure builds quietly in the background, completely invisible to anyone admiring the building from the street. So by the time your skyscraper opens its doors, you may already be billions of dollars into the project before you have earned your first real dollar of profit. And only now do we get to the part everyone imagines first, how a skyscraper actually makes money. The primary stream is straightforward: rent from office tenants, paid monthly, locked into leases that typically run 5, 10, sometimes 15 years. Long leases are attractive because they create predictable income, but they cut both ways, because a tenant locked in at a low rate during a weak market can quietly cost the owner enormous amounts of upside if rents rise later, while a tenant who leaves at the end of a lease during a soft market can leave a gaping hole in revenue that takes years to refill. The second stream is retail and ground floor commercial space, which often commands the highest rent per square foot in the entire building because of foot traffic, even though it occupies a tiny fraction of the total footprint. The third stream, increasingly important in modern trophy towers, is naming rights and branding. Companies pay enormous premiums to put their name at the top of a skyline, because a name on a tower functions as permanent advertising visible from miles away, and cities themselves start using that name in tourism business marketing without ever paying for it. The fourth stream is amenities and parking, observation decks, event spaces, restaurants, and in some towers, a hotel or residences layered into the upper floors to diversify income beyond office rent alone. Now, here is the other side of the ledger, and it is where the illusion of the money machine starts to crack. Start with maintenance, because a skyscraper does not age like an ordinary building. Elevators need constant servicing, and a failure in a 50-story tower is not a minor inconvenience. It is a logistical crisis affecting thousands of people at once. Facade systems, especially glass curtain walls, require specialized inspection and repair that ordinary buildings never need. Because a single failing panel hundreds of feet in the air is not just expensive to fix, it is a public safety emergency. HVAC systems designed to condition enormous vertical volumes of air are extraordinarily expensive to run and replace. Security requirements for a modern trophy tower, especially after events like September 11th reshaped how cities think about tall buildings, add permanent operating costs that did not exist for towers built a generation earlier. None of this is optional. A skyscraper cannot quietly defer maintenance the way a small landlord might defer painting a hallway, because a functional failure in a super tall building can be catastrophic, and insurers and regulators know it. Then there is property tax, and in most major cities, tall trophy buildings are assessed among the highest in the entire tax base, which means the annual bill alone can rival the operating budget of a mid-sized company. Then there is insurance, which for a landmark tower in a dense urban core carries risk premiums for fire, structural failure, and in some markets terrorism coverage that smaller buildings simply do not need to think about. Then there is the debt itself, which does not disappear once the building opens. Most skyscrapers are refinanced multiple times over their life, and every refinancing exposes the owner to whatever interest rate environment exists at that moment. A tower financed cheaply in one decade can face a brutal refinancing wall in the next if rates have risen and rents have not kept pace, and this single mechanism has been the actual cause of death for more prestigious towers than almost any other factor in the industry. This is the deeper point most outsiders miss. A full skyscraper is not automatically a profitable skyscraper. Occupancy looks like success from the street, but the real number that matters is effective rent after concessions, after tenant improvement allowances, after broker commissions. After the free months, many landlords quietly offer to lure anchor tenants into a building that needs their name on the directory to attract everyone else. A tower can report 90% occupancy and still be financially strained if too much of that space was leased at a discount, just to avoid the much scarier headline of a half-empty landmark building. Vacancy in a skyscraper is not just lost income, it is a visible signal, because everyone in the city can look up and count the dark floors at night. And once a building starts to look empty, it becomes harder to convince the next tenant that it is the address that matters. And this reveals the strangest thing about skyscraper economics. Unlike a factory or a warehouse, a skyscraper's value is partly psychological. Prestige feeds on itself. A tower with major anchor tenants attracts more tenants who want to be associated with that address. A tower that starts losing its anchor tenants can enter a spiral where remaining tenants start asking for better terms just to stay, which lowers effective rent, which weakens the building's finances, which makes it harder to invest in the upgrades needed to attract the next generation of premium tenants. The building itself has not physically changed. Its relevance has, and relevance is far more fragile than concrete. A famous example of this trap is the story of the Sears Tower, later renamed the Willis Tower, in Chicago. When it was completed in 1973, it was the tallest building in the world, a genuine engineering marvel and a symbol of corporate ambition. But Sears itself eventually moved out of the building that bore its name, and for years the tower struggled with the same challenge every aging skyscraper eventually faces: staying relevant against newer, more efficient buildings being built nearby with better technology and lower operating costs. The tower did not fail. It simply had to work harder and spend more to remain competitive, as the market's definition of a premium office building kept moving forward without it. There is an even stranger pattern that economists have actually studied directly, sometimes called the Skyscraper Index. Researchers have observed that a striking number of the world's tallest buildings were completed right around major economic downturns. The Empire State Building opening as the Great Depression deepened, the World Trade Center and Sears Tower both completed in the economically turbulent early 1970s, and several record-breaking Asian towers finishing construction just before regional financial crises. The theory is not that tall buildings cause recessions. It is that the extreme optimism, cheap credit, and easy money required to justify building the tallest structure in the world tend to appear right before that same optimism collapses. And the skyscraper simply becomes the most visible monument to a boom that was already running out of runway. So does owning a skyscraper actually work as a business in the optimistic scenario? Yes. You secure land in a location where demand for prestige office space is durable, not just fashionable for a moment. You control construction costs and timeline well enough that the debt does not outgrow the market before the building opens. You lock in strong anchor tenants who validate the address for everyone who considers leasing there afterward. You manage maintenance proactively instead of reactively, so the building never starts looking tired next to newer competitors. You refinance during favorable rate environments instead of being forced to refinance during a bad one. In that world, a skyscraper can produce decades of extremely durable income, because once the debt is paid down and the tower is established as a genuine address of record, very few assets in the world offer that combination of scarcity and permanence. In the pessimistic scenario, construction runs long and over budget while interest keeps accruing. The building opens into a soft leasing market. You lease too aggressively at discounted rates just to avoid empty floors. And by the time you need to refinance, rates have risen and the building's income no longer comfortably covers the new debt payment. Now you are defending a very tall, very visible asset with weakening cash flow, and unlike a struggling small business, you cannot simply close quietly. Everyone in the city can see exactly how many lights are on at night. This is the honest truth underneath the whole business. A skyscraper is not really a building. It is not really an investment in the ordinary sense either. It is a multi-decade leverage wager that a city's appetite for premium vertical real estate will stay strong enough for long enough to outrun the compounding cost of the money it took to build it. When that wager pays off, the income can be extraordinary and remarkably durable. When it does not, the same tower becomes one of the most expensive, most visible, and hardest to hide failures in the entire skyline. So if you ever do decide to own a skyscraper, understand what you are actually buying. You are not buying height. You are not buying a view. You are buying a very long bet on rent, relevance, and interest rates, built in steel and glass, so that the entire city can watch you win or watch you struggle, one lit floor at a time.